My name is Constance, and I'm here to welcome you all on behalf of the Unitarian Universalists of Grants Pass. This is a culmination of a collaborative effort by so many people unified through the desire of these four congregations: Bethany Presbyterian, Newman Methodist, St. Luke's Episcopal, and the Unitarians of Grants Pass, to lead and learn through faith and love. We gather together as a community of seekers to honor the interdependence of life, to respect the dignity of all, and to honor the land we walk humbly upon. Friends, let us acknowledge that we live upon the traditional territories of the Tekelma, Tuwala-Dine, and Cow Creek Umpqua, the original nations of this land, who continue to cry out for justice and self-determination. Let these thoughts carry us forth as we journey and worship together. Thank you. Nick.
Hello, my name is Nick Sverre-Grimsby, and I'm a vestry council member at St. Luke's Episcopal Church, and I will be facilitating today's discussion. On behalf of the Coalition of Affirming Churches and the organizing committee, I welcome you to this afternoon's panel discussion on understanding the needs of transgender youth. This issue goes beyond trans equality. We can legislate in ways that support trans people, and those laws will always be contested if they are not supported with a universal understanding that all people are deserving of respect and compassion. As an Episcopalian, as a Christian, this has been my mission: to champion and fight for the dignity of every human being. It is my prayer this afternoon that God's Holy Spirit moves every heart so that the barriers which divide us may crumble, suspicions may disappear, hatred cease, and our divisions be healed, so that we may live in peace and justice. With that, I would like to introduce our panelists for this afternoon: Reverend Ryan Scott, who is the pastor at Newman United Methodist Church; Dave Valenzuela, who is the superintendent at Three Rivers School District; Dr. Debra Koutnik, who is a behavioral pediatric physician; Elliott Feenstra, who is a lead community organizer for the Rogue Action Center's LGBT Listening Project; and Sky Snogren, a psychotherapist. Welcome and thank you for your participation. But before I invite Pastor Ryan to give his address, we will watch a short video.
When I went to school as a boy, I felt like I wasn't being who I was, and I wasn't being myself.
Thomas and I assumed we had a son and a daughter, and we lived as such, but then pretty early on, Ella started letting us know who she was. And when she was 2, she came downstairs and into the bedroom and to the doorway and just stood there and said, "Mama, I'm a girl." I was like, okay, well, I love you. And inside I'm like, this felt like a statement.
It felt like I was keeping a secret for a long time, and I never told anyone.
The first time she learned the word transgender and what that meant, she was like, "Mama, that's like me."
Ella was a very busy child all through the years, but also she would have a lot of anger. But once she came out, February 26th, 2016, she was a new person. There was just such beauty, a sense of relief. When our second child arrived, and it was my boy, I was so excited. Those dreams I had, all my plans. It's been hard for me emotionally, being raised in a rural community while I was in the Air Force. Hugs weren't that common. My dad taught me to be tough, and give me a pat on the back. And she just told me, said, "Dad, I am a girl, and this is who I am."
I think she just decided one day that she wasn't going to wait a few months, and she just came down for breakfast dressed in a pretty dress, pretty sandals, and a headband, and it was been unsaid today's the day.
When I went to school as Ella, I felt excited and also nervous, but proud because I was being who I was.
The community has been amazing. They completely embraced her. She has more friends than she ever had because now she is her true, authentic self.
My favorite things that I get to do now are having like sleepovers and play dates.
Basic Rights Oregon's message and education and what they're doing for us in the state of Oregon is huge.
Ella is safe here in Portland, but Ella needs to be safe in all of Oregon. And there's Ella's in Pendleton, there's Ella's in Grants Pass, what about the Ella in Medford? Like, this is why the work that Basic Rights Oregon does is so important, because it's not just about our Ella, it's about all the Ellas throughout Oregon that need to be safe.
You ever wondered what actors and actresses do when they have to get in shape really fast?
No, it hasn't happened.
Right, we're going to move on to our panelists' addresses. The Reverend Ryan Scott, pronouns he, him, is the pastor at Newman United Methodist Church in Grants Pass. His advocacy for the LGBTQ+ inclusion began in the Boy Scouts of America, where he led interfaith efforts to end the discriminatory bans on the LGBTQ+ youth and adult volunteers. His advocacy has continued as an open gay clergy person in the United Methodist Church. He is the chairperson of the Oregon-Idaho United Methodist LGBTQ advocacy team. Ryan and his husband Andre moved to Grants Pass in June of 2019 after having served churches in Seattle, Washington, Eugene, Springfield, and Toledo, Oregon. I now invite Reverend Ryan Scott to give his address.
Thanks, Nick. As the sole clergy person on the panel, I just wanted to start by being abundantly clear. It is not a sin to be transgender. Or gender non-conforming, gender fluid, etc. God celebrates gender and sexual diversity of all sorts. And I believe that God delights in the existence of queer and transgender people. There was a branch of theology called liberation theology, which came into being in the 1990s in Central America, particularly in El Salvador, where Catholic priests and Christian missionaries were persecuted for sticking up for people who were poor and marginalized and disenfranchised. And they were being targeted by fascist US-backed political and military powers. And at the core ethos of this liberation theology says that God has a preferential option for the poor and the oppressed. So I subscribe to this theology because I have experienced it to be true in my own life. The times that I've felt closest to God and the most true and in tune to my spirituality have not been preaching to a packed sanctuary on Sunday mornings. The times I felt the closest to God have been when I spend time with people who are on the margins of society. Some of my most memorable spiritual moments have been late at night in a gay bar, surrounded by hundreds of other queer people, in a space where we could truly and fully be ourselves in a way that might put us at risk if we were to do so in public. The times I've felt closest to God have been when I spend time with people in the margins. So not only do I believe that God loves queer people, I believe that God has a preferential option for queer people, for trans people, for anyone who has been othered by society. I believe that God wants us to be our most true and most authentic selves, unapologetic. At the core of my faith, I believe in a God, a divine presence, so full of love and grace that any attempt to exclude or marginalize people is totally irreconcilable with the gospel of Jesus Christ. It's out of a belief like this, that churches like Newman United Methodist Church, like St. Luke's, like Bethany, and those here at the UU Fellowship work towards making our community more loving, just, and inclusive for all people. And I'll be honest, there's still a lot of work to do, even in our progressive congregations. The progressive churches here in Grants Pass are more or less very comfortable with people of different sexual orientations, but we need some more education and conversation about gender diversity, which is why I'm happy to see events like this and others, conversations like this happening around the community, particularly events that are focused on youth who are transgender. I'm going to share a couple of statistics from the Trevor Project, and I hope I'm not stealing anyone's thunder here with this. But youth are 3 times more likely than their straight peers. LGBT youth are 3 times more likely than their straight peers to attempt suicide. And that number is even higher among LGBTQ youth from religious households. It's not only 2 times more likely or even 3 times more likely, but LGBTQ youth from religious households are 5 times more likely to attempt suicide than their other LGBTQ peers, and 8 times more likely than their straight peers. And I grieve, I truly grieve for all those beautiful lives lost because of a false, fear-based doctrine from the church. This is why it is so important for those of us who do call ourselves Christians or followers of Christ to be a voice of love and inclusion among the predominant religious symphony of fear and exclusion. This is why flying a pride flag at the church is important to me, and why specifically we must include people who are transgender. Churches cannot just keep saying all are welcome and expect that to keep working. This is why specifically we need to include people. Queer people have heard that line, all are welcome, over and over again throughout our lives, particularly in religious circles, and we know it just not to be true. Saying all are welcome is almost like saying all lives matter. So yes, of course, all lives matter. And yes, of course, all are welcome. But the reality is these words often aren't true, which is why we need to be specific, which is why events like this need to continue to happen so that people in the religious community, people who are professionals can be that voice of inclusion and reason and say that no, being transgender is not something to be ashamed of. Being transgender is something to be proud of. Thank you.
And I would also like to invite our audience members to, if you have any questions, please send them into the chat and we will get to them during the Q&A portion of this afternoon's event. Thank you.
Next, send them to Anne. Send them to Anne.
Oh, and send them to Anne. Your questions, please send to Anne. Right, moving on. It'll be Anne. What is it?
Andrea Eigel.
Andrea Eigel. Please send them to her in the chat function of Zoom. Dave Valenzuela, him, is a lifelong resident of Josephine County and attended Three Rivers School District since 1st grade. After graduating from the Illinois Valley High School, he worked for the Three Rivers School District as in the maintenance department during the summers while attending Western Oregon University. Dave began his teaching career in 1997 at Fleming Middle School, where he taught special education. He has spent nearly his entirety of his educational career at the Three Rivers School District and is now in his 6th year as its superintendent. He is the proud parent of a gender non-binary child and also enjoys spending time with his beautiful blended family, his wife, April, and 3 wonderful children. I now invite David to give his address.
Thank you. So I'm here as the introduction mentioned, as a parent, first and foremost. That's why I feel the most important reason for me to be in this room and have this discussion, which is really important. I want to thank everyone for putting it on. Getting prepared for this has really helped clarify some things for me as I think through, telling this story. And so thank you for doing that. And then secondarily, and maybe for some people more important, I am here speaking from an educational perspective. And I want to talk a little bit about the journey that K-12 education has been on this topic, supporting students, and how much I want to illustrate how much further we have to go. So we recently passed some really great policies in Three Rivers School District, and it's called the Every Student Policy, and it explicitly talks about how we have to support every student, because there are some people that might choose not to support every student and not understand what every student walks through the door. You know, they don't understand, or they choose not to understand, and so therefore they marginalize intentionally those students that walk through the door. So I was at a school where we were giving basically we have an equity, diversity, and inclusion committee, and they are out in schools talking about this policy and introducing it to staff, because like I said, there's a lot of misunderstanding out there. And I'm in the back of this one room where this was being introduced, and somebody raised their hand and was like, you know, I just don't get, you know, I have a student that one day comes in and says they're this, and one day comes in and says they're that. Another day they come in, I don't get it. And I don't, you know, this doesn't make any sense. And they're going on and on and on. And the person that was giving the presentation saw me in the back and was like, well, you know, I have someone that can answer that question. Pointed to me, and the person that was saying all that didn't know I was behind them, and they were they were shocked. But anyway, it gave me an opportunity to tell this story that I'm about to tell. So in February of 2000, I was in the hospital waiting for my child to arrive. And at that time, so the sex assigned at birth was, I even talked to my child before coming here to try to get this right, because it's very important. Sex assigned at birth, female, and was given the dead name now, Caitlin Valenzuela. And so they now go by Cade or Caden, and identifies as non-binary. But so back in 2000, I'm just you know, a dad, first time, you know, parent. That was my first child, and I'm excited. And like the video talked about, I'm thinking about all the things that are going to happen. You know, all the softball games that I'll go to, all the things that entail, you know, raising your child. And for the first few years, you know, everything was as I expected, I guess, for the most part. And then middle school came around, and my, you know, successful child started having all these problems with school, with peers, with us, with her mother, and with their mother and I. I'm still working on it really hard, with their mother and I. And all throughout middle school, we actually changed middle schools. We did everything we could to wrap ourselves around what we didn't understand what was going on. And there were times where my child would threaten suicide, and you know, our standard every time we would respond extremely. You know, we would go to the emergency room, and every time was like we treated it like it was real, right? Because we had to. And but all those things that were happening were because of the transition that my child was going through, and I didn't have any concept or support as a parent. I mean, I was as lost as Cade was. And there was a lot of denial for me. You know, I was like, well, you know, middle school kid, probably just a phase. And I mean, I can't tell you how many times I said it to myself, and how I feel about saying that now. It's like, I'm ashamed of feeling that way. But I feel like I was going through a process, and it was, like I said, there's no roadmap. I couldn't look it up. I mean, I guess I might have been able to look it up, but there was nothing to guide me through what I was dealing with because of what Cade was going through. And then as we got into high school, things started to level out, because Cade openly came out, and at that time came out and identified as homosexual, and was gay. And that, you know, that realization for me was another evolutionary process to go through. But then I was able to understand and start to support my child. And so all these things that were happening, now I could identify and understand what was going on. Now, it's been a struggle for me to try to figure out how best to support Cade. And like, you'll hear me say she every once in a while. I still do that, and I did it on the phone with them when I was getting ready for this today. I was talking, and we were talking about their cat, and I said, yeah, she still loves to do X, Y, and Z. I was like, oh, I mean they. And like when I'm talking to my mom about how Cade's doing in college, and Cade's doing great in college now, I'll say, you know, they just got a job and they're doing really well. And my mom will go, who are you talking about? How many people are we talking about here? I'm like, well, it's Cade. And well, why do you say, you know, and so I'm having this dialogue with my mom, and there's so much that goes into understanding how to support Cade. But like the video we just saw, now that Cade is firmly rooted with her identity as non-binary and Caden instead of the dead name Caitlin, and that's all like out there, and it's a solid part of her life or their life. They are so much happier. They're super successful in school. They're doing great with their job. They have a wonderful partner. They have their own apartment, and they're just happy. And I've never felt more love for my child now than I've ever have, because they are expressing who they are in a very authentic way. So I guess my message about like just trying to illustrate quickly what the last 21 years has been like is that if there are parents out there that are experiencing this, this panel is happening, but there's so many resources out there, and I beg you not to try to do it alone. And I beg you not to just ignore it or feel like it's a phase that's going to go away. That moment in time when your child identifies as something other than what your concept is, it's time to support them in that moment in time, no matter what that is. And so that was a lesson that I wish I had learned early on. And I feel like, you know, I'm making great strides in my relationship with my child to let them know that every mistake I might have made as they were growing up, I'm trying to make up for it as they grow into the beautiful person they are. And so, you know, when they were in school, and I'm going to talk a little bit more about schools at the end, but there were no navigational waypoints for them. They started the first Pride Club in Three River School District back at Hidden Valley High School, and that was a struggle. There was a lot of bullying. There was a lot of name calling, a lot of harassment, and most of it was from students, but not all of it. And so from a school district perspective and from a K-12, I think K-12 across the board perspective, we have a lot of work to do, and I hope to talk a little bit more about that towards the end, but that's my story.
Dr. Debra Koutnik. Dr. Debra Koutnik, she/her, is a pediatrician who specializes in working with children with behavioral, mental health, and neurodevelopmental challenges. She spent 5 years as an NIMH research fellow at Cornell University Department of Neurobiology and Behavior. After completing her medical training at the University of California, San Francisco, she was the medical coordinator for the Mental and Child Health Program of America Samoa. She and her family returned to the mainland United States in 1994 and settled in Ashland, Oregon. She has provided gender-affirming medical and psychological care to gender-diverse youth in Southern Oregon for the past 15 years. I now invite Dr. Koutnik to give her address.
Thank you, Nick. I'm Debra Koutnik. I'm a long-term pediatrician here, and Nick gave you my bio. So as a pediatrician and someone who is more of a visual learner, I actually like to use some slides. Put those up, that would be nice. So this is Philo of Alexandria. He lived 2,000 years ago. And this quote is ascribed to him: "Be kind, for everyone you meet is fighting a great battle." And I like to ground this work in that idea that We don't know what's happening for people on the inside. We don't know what they're struggling with. But if we can just hold that compassion, in my pediatric practice, I try to meet people with the knowledge that all parents, all caregivers are doing their best. We all love our children. We all want what's best for them. But sometimes, as Dave was saying, we don't always have that information. We don't always know what we need to do what's best. And so that's why I'm so glad that we're having this conversation today. Next slide, please. So times are changing, and that can create anxiety for people, right? When there are big societal changes. 90% of Americans know someone personally who's gay, but only 20% of Americans personally know someone who's transgender. So that makes a difference too. You know, trying to understand people usually starts with having conversations with people. We know that educators have some fears about how parents are going to react to trying to have a gender inclusive curriculum. Both parents and educators have fears about talking to children about gender, and I hope actually after today that will be less of a fear for you. There are fears that about, talking about these things is somehow going to cause children to become trans, non-binary, or gay, which is totally not true. And then some people hold beliefs that the idea of gender non-binary goes against their personal beliefs. And while we honor your beliefs, we understand your fears, the bottom line is we cannot let those harm children and students. Next slide, please. So there are a few numbers up here because I think they're significant. This is not an uncommon issue. In Oregon, surveys show that 1 out of 17 adolescent students identifies as non-binary. That a great many of them feel unsafe at school, as Dave was saying, and this part broke my heart. 67% of the students in Oregon reported hearing teachers and other school staff making negative remarks about their gender expression. Next slide, please. So what happens? These kids have low self-esteem, withdrawal, depression. They certainly can't do well in school. It's very hard to focus on studies when you're dealing with fear and hostility in your climate every day. And as Reverend Ryan said, often suicide is what this leads to. And everyone should be very concerned. In Oregon, suicide is the leading cause of death in youth 10 to 24. More than accidents, more than all other causes. And it's been going up over the past 10 years. Next slide, please. And this orange graph, and again, these are Oregon students showing the amount of suicidal ideation and attempts. And while it is sad for all of these groups, the fact that the orange bar is so much higher than the other groups is why we're here today. Next slide, please. All these children are transgender or non-binary, and I want you to just imagine the stress experienced by these kids facing a society that is essentially often saying, you should not exist. Next slide, please. So what I like to do to get, is just, what is gender? Help people understand what is gender. This is not something that just non-binary and just transgender people experience. We all experience gender, right? Everyone experiences gender. Gender is a concept that has to do with biology, cultural tradition, rules, expectations, many things. And it is not static, it is not universal, it changes over time and it changes between cultures. Next slide, please. So in thinking about the social construction of gender expression, I would like you to note this adorable little Flemish boy here in 1625 wearing the cutest brocade dress and most adorable hat. And Clarence Lacey Wise in 1892 with the most adorable little gingham dress and little lace collar, because that's how boys in our culture dressed at that time. So the idea of gender is not static. Next slide, please. So what is gender and gender identity? First, I want to tell you what it is not. And this is a very important take-home message. Gender is not our genital anatomy. And Ken is going to help us remember that. Growing up in the American culture, everybody has experienced Ken and Barbie, and probably most people in a lot of other places in the world. And everybody knows that Ken is a boy, Ken is male. Is there anyone who doubts that? Next slide, please. And yet, gender is not the same as our genital anatomy. Next slide, please. The other thing gender identity is not, and is often confused with, is sexual orientation. They are totally separate. Gender identity is about who you are. Sexual orientation is about who you're attracted to. Gender is personal. Sexual orientation is interpersonal. And any gender identity can experience any sexual orientation. Next slide, please. So what is gender identity? Well, the reason this little gingerbread boy has a beautiful brain is because gender identity is a brain-centered sense of self. As we said, it's separate and independent from your anatomy, and it may or may not be the same as your gender role or sex assigned at birth, although it usually is. It is unique. Gender is unique to each of us, and we all have a unique gender identity because we all have a unique brain. And just like everyone listening and everyone in this room is different and unique and makes the spectrum of humanity, so it is with gender. Next slide, please. And this is not new. It is more visible in our particular society and culture at this time, but throughout the world and throughout time, there have always been non-binary gender people. Next slide, please. I would love nothing more than to give a 2-hour lecture on neuroanatomy, which I'm not going to do. And the only reason I put this up here is because gender is based in the brain. And there is nothing more complex than the human brain. It contains the same number of neurons as there are stars in the Milky Way. It contains as many connections as there are stars in the entire universe. We each hold a universe in our brain. And there is certainly room for gender diversity in that brain. Next slide, please. I don't have much time. So how does this happen? Well, gender development begins at birth. And nowadays, with gender reveal parties, it happens even before birth. Why do people have gender reveal parties? Not just to blow things up, although sadly that happens. It is so they can already start to put a box on that baby, even before they enter the world. Newborns are treated differently from the moment they're born. How many times have we seen a pink bow taped on the bald head of a little baby that looks exactly like all the other little babies? But let's stick that pink bow on there so we're sure. So our concept of gender as an individualist shape our environment. It begins at birth. And think for just a minute, how many messages do we all get every day, day in, day out, about what do boys do and what do girls do, and is it okay and isn't it okay? So even without overt hostility towards people who are non-binary, we're sending those messages. And most children start to identify their gender about 3 or 4 years old. This happens early. And just like all the other aspects of development, language, thinking, it changes over time. So yes, Dave, it's true. When kids are going through adolescence, they often can be trying on different identities. That's true of all adolescents. And it is true of kids who are exploring their gender identity and coming to know who they are. Next slide, please. So who's hurt by gender bias? Everybody. Everybody. It limits job opportunities, how we can express feelings and emotions. It can encourage aggression to fulfill certain stereotypes. It can create that negative sense of self in those children who don't fit those societal expectations of gender expression. It promotes bullying and harassment, as we've heard. And at its worst, it promotes violence and even murder of people who do not conform to societal expectations. of gender roles and expression. And that is why it is so important to have these discussions, because we need to start making changes to make the world safe for everyone. So I'm just going to say, a fear people have is that somehow I will, quote, I will make my child transgender, right? If I let my boy wear nail polish, or if I let my boy wear a tutu, that I'm somehow going to change who he is. The only thing you're telling him is that you love who he is, because trying to change a child's gender expression won't change their gender identity, but it can make them feel rejected, depressed, and needing to hide who they are. And that is certainly not what we're hoping for. Next slide, please. So remember the power that the adults have in children's lives, because the simple act of using the right name and the right pronoun is an act of acceptance, support, and affirmation that can truly change or even save a life. Next slide, please. Thank you.
Elliott Feenstra, he, they, is an organizer, a performer, a teacher, and a gardener. He works as a lead community organizer for the Rogue Action Center's LGBTQ+ Listening Project, which is mapping the needs and resources of the queer community in Southern Oregon and envisioning a stronger LGBTQ+ led movement. He is a descendant from Frisian potato farmers and early English settlers to North Carolina, but grew up in Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania, and has lived and worked in Southern Oregon on and off since 2012. He is an artistic co-director of Beyond Boom and Bust, a theater project about the economy and resilience. His work focuses on using community-based arts, dialogue, and organizing to lift up racial and queer histories, land justice movements, and reckoning with inter-inheritance, and our relationship to the places we live. He lives on a former commune in Tequila, Oregon, and his partner with his partner and 2 cats. I now invite Elliot to give their address.
Thanks, Nick. Hi, my name is Elliott Feenstra. As Nick said, I'm 32 years old. I live in the Illinois Valley. I'm the lead organizer of the Listening Project, which I've been doing for about a year and a half. As Nick said, I've lived on and off in Josephine County since 2012. In that time, I've lived in Hugo and Cape Junction and worked in Grants Pass, as well as in the Three Rivers School District. In my current role at the Rogue Action Center, I have been supporting a coalition of students and community members who've been gathering regularly since the I Resolve proposal surfaced at North Middle School in District 7, which I think was in about March. So I'm a transgender person. I can speak a bit about my experience of growing up or of living here, but I wanted to kind of first share some of what I've learned from the past 6 or 7 months of working with transgender students in our local schools, along with Debra and Anne and Constance and many other folks. In this time, I've had the privilege to meet and hear from a number of LGBTQ+ students in Grants Pass. And since one of the projects of today is about understanding the needs of transgender students and what they'd like to see at school, and since students are doing that work, but they're not here, I wanted to try to do my best to bring some of their voices into the room. So I asked Sylvia to share, and it's just kind of going to be beside me, that some of the notes from a May 12th TIDE, the diversity, equity, community meeting that happened in District 7, where they asked for input from students, educators, and community members about current concerns and things that they would like to see happen in District 7. So that was one way I wanted to kind of bring that in. If you're a visual person, feel free to read that. I'm not going to really directly read all the things. So if you want to focus on me, either way. But to start, I wanted to name some of the issues that I've heard from students and share some of the things that trans and non-binary students and their friends and families and educators have said that they would like to see. So first, I've heard many trans and queer students don't feel a sense of belonging in our local schools. I've heard students reporting fear for their physical safety, having their peers and their teachers publicly denounce transgender people or claim that gender dysphoria is made up. I've heard students talk about bullying and harassment of LGBTQ+ students, and that the use of slurs isn't addressed by teachers. Many teachers don't feel like they don't have the tools, or they don't know how, or they're unwilling to interrupt behaviors that are invalidating to transgender and non-binary students. So, for example, a story that a teacher is absent, they didn't tell the substitute that a student is trans, the substitute uses the student's birth name because it isn't updated in the records. Other students laugh when the substitute says that. They're looking at the trans student and making fun of them. The substitute is confused. They continue to use the student's name. They compliment the student on their name because they're confused about what's going on, which creates a super traumatic situation for the student, you know, with a number of moments that could maybe have been changed or interrupted, you know, in the system, in the communication by the other students. Yeah. So in some cases, this kind of basic like invalidation is sort of excused as this is being just a perspective or just a word or something that shouldn't hurt. And for many young people, hearing transphobic or homophobic slurs is also something that's happening at home, like from family and friends. It's really normal. And ideally then school would be a safer space, or a space that is different than that kind of culture. Some students have brought up that the district has held listening sessions to hear from LGBTQ+ students, but there's repeatedly no or little action. The curriculum doesn't reflect and celebrate the contributions of lesbian, gay, and transgender people. In all fields, we are scientists, we're historians, we're soldiers, we're authors before we were, you know, out or regardless. So yeah, I've heard from many of the students who are speaking about the places that they imagine living once they can leave Grants Pass, which is really sad. And this is kind of like heavy and hard, but I want to just pass this along to have this in the room as, you know, I think I feel really touched that this event is happening, and to name that I'm coming with some grief and anger for, yeah, for what has happened and hope for what could happen. So as folks know, the I Resolve movement brought a lot more public attention to the topic of trans people and trans students, which unfortunately I think has also, as I've heard, generated more bullying and harassment. I want to be clear that transgender people existed long before this, and in Grants Pass, we're not new. We've lived here for a long time. And so I wanted to share a couple of the ways and that students felt about the I Resolve movement. So this is from some students in District 7. One said, I expected better from teachers who were supposed to help students. Hate does not belong in the school system, and the fact that these teachers talked so confidently about suppressing a student in their care is more than upsetting. This was very harmful to LGBTQ+ youth, especially because not all students come from a home with supportive parents. So having to get parent permission before pronouns and name change happens at school is wrong. This continued to perpetuate the harmful stereotypes of LGBT people, including kids, that we are somehow predatory and that simple things like using the bathroom is a topic of debate. And that mindset is exactly why I am never going to be fully accepted for who I am in my lifetime. I have seen how much this has hurt transgender students. This makes me upset because those people should not have their identity disrespected based on their genitals. These teachers are stripping the ownership of kids' bodies away from them, specifically in private areas, and not acknowledging who they are. Acknowledging someone's identity correctly is a right that they're born with, and they're violating this right. So I want to shift to talk about some of the things that I've heard from students about how our schools can be welcoming and safe for trans and binary students. And again, thank you for being here, because I think that learning and this listening and this conversation is a critical step. So here's some of the things that students have had to say. Make an effort to use the correct pronouns and preferred name. Interrupt hate, slurs, or hateful actions when they take place in the classroom. Don't ignore it. Don't label it as just another side. Acknowledge harm when it happens. Understand that school might be a student's only escape from an invalidating or unsafe home situation. Speak up against I resolve. I think this was particularly for educators and administrators. Take a public, clear stance. Let students know that you are supportive. Learn more about being queer, especially being queer in Oregon, and do your best to support us accordingly. Listen to queer students and don't put your own input when it isn't your place to speak. To the best of your ability, teach your students about tolerance and compassion for people who are different from them. Make sure that students know you are a safe person to talk to. Even if your personal views don't align, even if you don't know, you can be a supportive adult. Help them find resources, Google it, whatever. Never tell someone they are in the wrong bathroom. Try to make sure you know what the bathroom situation is. If there's gender neutral or single restrooms available, where are they? So that everyone can use the bathroom safely. So those are some of the asks that I've heard from students. Other things that we've heard include a real need to shift the culture among students. A safe, supportive school environment would educate students as well as teachers and staff about what it means to be transgender, lesbian, or gay, how transphobia and homophobia show up, and how to actively interrupt harmful or hateful moments. Students want to see a proactive public response from their leaders and administrators. They want to see accountability. When harm happens, what's the repair? And Kieran, somebody who was part of the coalition, brought up, while we can't make sure that every space is affirming, we can try to make sure that there's more affirming spaces than non-affirming ones. So, if you're a welcoming or inclusive congregation, Grants Pass could really use more, recreational safe spaces for queer and trans kids. Currently, there's none. So we can just create more positive, inclusive, and welcoming spaces. And finally, including youth voice in the decisions that affect them, but not relying on students to educate staff and the districts and educators. So we want to give kids the room to discover themselves, explore their identities, and focus on school, so that everyone can bring their gifts and focus on becoming the best versions of ourselves that can take on the challenges facing our communities and our world. I could say a little more about myself, but I feel like that was probably 10 minutes. So maybe I'll just kind of stop there. So thank you.
All right, thank you. Sky Snogren, am I pronouncing that right? Snogren. They, them, and he, his is a local psychotherapist serving Jackson and Josephine County. They are both part of the queer community and work with many LGBTQIA individuals, families, and couples. They specialize in PTSD and trauma, as well as queer issues. Since moving to Oregon 6 years ago, they have been asked to give presentations to companies, medical professionals, SOU grad programs, and now this for the community at large, as well as those who question the reality of being trans and why it matters to give trans kids, like all kids, a safe place to grow into their authentic selves. I now invite Sky to give their address.
Thank you. As I was sitting here and contemplating the act of taking my mask off, I don't know, that just feels so raw as I hear everybody, the welcoming, the love, the openness that I hear on this panel, that is just touches my heart so profoundly as a therapist, as a trans person, as a queer person, as a 55-year-old who has been othered pretty much all of my life, to be in a space right now with people that fully embrace and accept me, not just from the human that I am, but also for, being a psychotherapist and just being somebody on the planet that has things to offer. So the unmasking, I don't know, there's just something that was revelatory for me, I guess, about that. And it also makes me realize I'm going to make this both professional and very personal, because it is both to me. The distress, you know, so how we define in psychology as we're assessing a child or anybody for gender dysphoria is we look at the amount of distress that they carry around their gender. And there's a variety of different ways in which that comes out, with play, with dress, with names, pronouns, all of that. And that distress can be so intense that the kids just, they can't come out of themselves. Either they get extremely depressed, which I see more often than not, highly anxious, suicidal, that's been spoken to here. But it makes it very hard to perform. It makes it very hard to make it through school. It makes it hard to develop friendships. It makes it hard to just be a part of a society that isn't fully embracing. As I was hearing everybody else, I can't tell you how many times tears just came upon me. And it made me imagine, as I've done before, what would life be like for me if my parents had have gotten the cues when I was probably 5 to 8, I think is when I really started showing that I was gender nonconforming. What would my life be today? What would my anxiety, because I'm terrified speaking to everybody. This is one of the hardest things for me to do. I've avoided it for 55 years until I moved here. You know, what would my anxiety be like if I was loved and accepted from the get-go? First as being a lesbian, now as being a trans man. So, breathing through my emotion, I feel for these kids that I'm working with. I also feel for parents. It's scary. And teachers, you know, while this is not new, it has been with us for millennia. There is a upsurgence, or whatever we would call that is happening now, where I think similar to gay and lesbians 30 some odd years ago, this feels like a similar kind of coming out of the closet of the trans people. And so I know that it's scary. I know that it's confusing to a lot of people that don't understand it. And the best way that we can support anybody, as most of you have spoken to on the panel already, is to just love them, accept them, encourage and support them. They will figure out who they are. Kids' whole occupation really is self-discovery. Who am I in this world? How am I going to express myself? What do I have to offer? And if they're not getting that support and encouragement from secondary school, primary and secondary school, that's the foundation. That's where we're developing. That's where we're spending the vast majority of our life. I'm working currently with a trans person who I started working with at the onset of the pandemic. So she was never in school in person for the first year that we worked together. When school went back in person, she was able to get the school to call her by her chosen name and chosen pronouns. I cannot tell you how her affect changed. She stopped being suicidal, her depression lifted, her ability to connect with friends significantly got easier. She just kind of has come out of her shell in certain ways just by being able to do that. I know that there's a lot of concern in the schools if parents aren't involved in the decision-making around how the child is going to be identified. With this particular trans girl, her parents they love her intensely, support her and hold her in so many different ways, and are 100% not behind her being trans. If she had have gone back to school in person and not been able to get the school system to use her proper name and proper pronouns, she would not be in the place that she is today, where, again, just the happiness, the strength, the confidence that I'm seeing that's happening in her. I don't believe that would have happened if she was having to use her dead name and pronouns. So I think that there's a time and a place in the school system for parents not to be involved, because there are some parents that it does more damage to not be loved and embraced. I don't know where I was going to go with that, but I think the point was there. School is a place, I think, that we need to feel really, really safe. We need to be able to be who we are and express who we are, no matter what. And we need that environment to hold us and to love us. I read a quote, I think, from the I Resolve movement about it takes a community to raise a child and to create a healthy community, which I 100% agree. But in order for there to be a healthy child, there needs to be a healthy community. And in order for there to be a healthy community, there needs to be love and acceptance of all diversity. That needs to be gone, that judgment, that fear, that wherever that comes from in people. It's only when we start embracing everybody in their diversity that people will be able to flourish, that we will be able to have societies that are cohesive and functional and healthy. So I will end with that. I greatly appreciate everybody that has shown up today and put this on. It's a phenomenal thing, and thank you all for showing up today as well.
All right. Thank you, and thank you, panelists. We will now shift to our question and answer portion of our event. And just to remind you viewers that you can submit questions at any time, and just leave them in the chat box. And of course, all of your questions will remain anonymous. I would like to start with a clarification question. What is the I Resolve movement? So anyone who's familiar with that. So we touched on it a few times, and I have a feeling we're going to be touching on it again.
Do you want to, or I can?
Go ahead.
Okay. Let's see. So in about late March of this year, two teachers at a vice principal and a science teacher, Ms. Damiano and Ms. Meadart at North Middle School, started a movement called I Resolve. They made a video they put on YouTube and a petition, and the proposals were to, gosh, what was it? It was like students could only use the bathroom that corresponds with their anatomy. They didn't specify how they would be checking students' anatomy, but that was the proposal, and that students could only if they were going to use a different name than their birth name, it had to be related to their birth name and approved by their parents, and also any kind of pronoun change. So that was like the basic proposal, and they put it out there as like, this is a totally reasonable, compassionate way to deal with the gender identity problem. which is I mean, it's sort of in this very like, we are nice people way. And yeah, they, you know, talked about students coming to them, being confused about not having clear policy from the school district about how to deal with students reporting that their gender was something different than the teacher thought, you know? And so this was their proposal for addressing that. So in terms of what happened from there, there's been a lot of things that happened from there. I mean, really what the impact of that movement and that proposal that I spoke to was that the students and community felt like this is really clearly targeting and stigmatizing transgender and non-binary students, and would actually create harmful, like a harmful climate. Yeah, and kind of really goes against what actually the explicit guidance from the Oregon Department of Education, the federal administration, which has extended Title IX, like gender discrimination measures to explicitly include transgender students, that protects transgender students' civil rights, which includes like transgender students have the right to openly talk about how they identify, to use the name and pronoun that they want to be called by, to have safe bathroom access. So those were all, you know, the I Resolve movement was something else, and this is also happening on a national level. So this is sort of one example of where, you know, whether this was these educators' idea or if they were kind of figureheads for a movement, you know, they were this issue of transgender students is kind of being used to try to recruit people into a broader kind of hateful movement. So I don't know if you want to add more, but that was the basics. There's been an extended process within District 7. The District 7 administration sent an internal email right away saying we support all students. But this community and student coalition has been working since then to really ask them to take a more public supportive stance supporting trans students and to put some policy behind improving the climate at the school for trans students. And I think in the paper just this week, well, yeah, there's a lot that's continuing to unfold. They're appealing the decision, and so it's still happening. Yeah. Does that, Dave, Deborah, do you want to add anything?
I think that covers it. I mean, it's, yeah.
I would add a couple of things, which is that, you know, I would really like this panel to focus not on the I Resolve movement. Totally. I really want this panel to focus on how we can support the gender diverse community and to understand that, as Pastor Ryan Scott shared with us, and that's one of the reasons that we have the sponsorship of all these beautiful, welcoming, affirming churches, that this is not a religious issue. They tried to make it an issue of religious freedom. It is not a religious issue. We'll move on.
All right. What are pronouns? Why are pronouns so important to gender non-binary people? And what should I do if I make a mistake with using someone's pronouns?
I would probably say Sky
you
and
want to
Elliott.
answer that, or you know?
I'll go for it.
Sure.
So gender, obviously, so there's sex and there's gender. There, you kind of got into that a bit, but I'll expound maybe a little bit. Because I personally differentiate, and I see a lot of people that are differentiating, because we've got a group of people that present as transgender and some that are presenting as transgender or transsexual, where they just feel such discord in their whole body that they need to make a lot of changes anatomically. But the pronoun part of it, that is the gender, that is the way that we express ourselves socially, behaviorally. In our society, there are so many different expectations for males and for females that go along with those pronouns that can just get really distressing, to use the psychological word. So they are important. They're important to be honored and listened to, and just like you did, you know, during your presentation with your child, correct yourself, you know? The minute that you see yourself using the wrong pronoun or recognize it, even if it's 5 minutes later, say, whoops, sorry about that, I just realized, and then correct yourself. The more that you do that, one, that person, the kid, is going to feel loved, respected, and like you're really working at it. You know, you're doing your part. There was another piece to that, but it just left me. So it's important for them to be seen as they are, as they know themselves to be, both name and gender wise. And again, it's just an intense amount of distress. My voice is not a perfect voice. So I talk to people on the phone and I'm she'd, and I cannot tell you how disturbing that is to me. It, you know, it just agitates, makes me sad. So again, personal experience, but I see it also professionally over and over again with both name and pronoun.
I would just say, add one thing to that is, you know, I've had patients who have expressed, you know, they don't want to go back to school, it's terrible, and then come and say to me something like, I went into my biology class and the teacher started the year with, you know, I'm Betty, I go by she, her, and here's our syllabus for biology. And just by hearing that, that student had a completely different attitude towards going back to school. It really does validate people's identity.
Thank you.
Can I add one thing?
Yeah,
Which is just like, I think it's so nice when people ask. I mean, I think it's just getting normalized. Like I see it in people's, you know, email signatures to add their own pronouns or yeah, just like, I mean, I am a gender weird looking person. Not all, you know, some people transition or change their gender, and you don't necessarily know that they're gender nonconforming or that their gender is different than what it was when they were 2 years old, you know. But for me, I'm like, you might look at me and not know, or you might assume this or that. And so anyway, when people say like, what pronoun do you use, or, you know, what pronoun do you prefer, or like, that's fine. It's a nice question. I feel more invited into the space. And then if they mess up, and then they correct themselves, it's fine, you know? Yeah, so I know my parents have done a lot of falling over their own feet, you know, and I have a lot, I'm just like, I know they love me. When you know that somebody like respects you, loves you, is trying to do right by you, it doesn't hurt in the same way as if it's like a malicious thing. Like it feels totally different, yeah.
Thank you. Does health insurance cover gender affirming health and mental care in Southern Oregon? Deborah, I think this is it.
Well, I'll speak to the medical part. Sky can speak to the mental health part. You know, Oregon is a wonderful state in terms of trying to, right, we had Medicaid expansion with the Affordable Care Act and try to serve as many people as possible. And one of the things that came with the Affordable Care Act was not having a limit on, you know, the treating gender transition was the same as any other medical condition. So in the state of Oregon, including people on the Oregon Health Plan, which has only been true for a few years, it wasn't always true, and I had to do actually a lot of very creative diagnosing, but anyway, no fraud. So yes, it is covered in Oregon.
And the
same with mental health.
And actually Shane Smith, who lived in Grants Pass, now he's out in Butte Falls. He was he advocated for trans healthcare to be included in OHP and really pushed like statewide that coverage further. So he's like recognized as a queer hero by the Gay and Lesbian Association of the Pacific Northwest. And he did that work while living in Grants Pass. Yeah.
Good.
How has the Universal Church made steps to reclaim a positive and affirming atmosphere for disenfranchised LGBT people? And I think we can narrow this down to maybe just the Methodists instead of all of Christianity.
Well, the Universal Church, I don't think has made very many steps. They're less denominations that are affirming than there are that are not affirming. Like perfect examples here in Grants Pass, we only have 4 Christian churches in the UUs, which I don't quite put in the Christian category. Christian adjacent, maybe, a lot of overlap. Compared to the dozens and dozens of congregations we have, there's only these 4 affirming congregations. And they're on the smaller side too. The affirming churches in Grants Pass, they aren't the big churches in town. We're, I think Bethany, St. Luke's, and Newman, we're all similar in size. We're not big congregations, but for what we lack in size, we have in heart and in voice. And speaking just from the Methodist Church, we aren't perfect either. Most United Methodist churches in the Western United States are very affirming and progressive and moving forward on this issue. But that's not the case everywhere. It's not even the case everywhere in Josephine County. There's 3 United Methodist churches in Josephine County, and we're not on the same page. And it's very obvious. You can see the differences between our congregations. All that being said, I think there have been amazing strides in inclusion. Like I said when I spoke earlier, most of our progressive churches are pretty well established and comfortable with sexual orientation differences. That's, we kind of took care of that last decade. But the last 10, 20 years, we were struggling a lot more and having a lot more conversations around gender diversity. And we were talking about, having your heart in the right place. Now, chances are if you come to my church, for example, Newman United Methodist, and you are a transgender person, chances are you are likely to get misgendered at some point. But that's not out of a malicious intent. Like, even if you let people know what your pronouns are, it's new for a lot of these folks. They come from generations where that wasn't common, or they're still learning about this. And I think that's where the progress is people are willing to learn, they're willing to ask questions now, and they're willing to have those conversations. And you bring up transgender things anymore, and it's not, that doesn't end the conversation. It's a continuing of, I want to learn more about this. I have curiosities. So in that regard, I think we've made quite a bit of progress.
What are some challenges you may have experienced in affirming your identity that you still see being an issue for kids today? Open to anyone to jump in.
I notice I'm like stumbling on this question, maybe because what are some issues in affirming my identity that might be around for other people? Maybe for me, I'm like, oh, the task of loving myself and knowing myself deeply continues. And that will probably happen for all young people. So I mean, I don't know that quite gets at the specifics of the question, but echoing what you said, Sky, like, I think my parents have really tried, and I grew up in a really like a community where there were not visible gay or lesbian people or transgender people. It was not talked about. I was in a secret relationship with my best friend in high school, and I came out like under duress as gay. And then later, once I left my parents' house and moved, I was like, I have to get to the big city where there's people like me. And now I'm like, I'm not a big city person. I love living in the woods. Like, part of why I live in Josephine County is I love this land. I love the mountains. I love the Illinois River. In coming to this area, I found like an intergenerational queer community, like queer elders who were building their own cabins and living on land, and that I had never experienced anywhere else. And I was like, I love this place. So I have like had deeply healing experiences living in this area, as well as totally traumatizing experiences. So, I hope that some things are like, things are different. I'm 32. I'm sure things are different for people who are 16 now. I don't think that struggle ever goes away. The struggle of trying to figure out who you're supposed to be in the world and what way of presenting yourself matches what you feel inside. And even if you've been one way for a while, I mean, this could even be, you know, you could recognize it from your relation to a job or a hobby. Like you kind of get one way for a while and then realize something has to change, and like, you know, I have to shake it off. And yeah, like change never goes away. So, I mean, that's still hard, but yeah.
Could you read the question again?
Yeah.
What are some challenges you have experienced in affirming your identity that you see as still being an issue for today's kids?
The wording is a little complicated to wrap my head around, but coming out, taking the mask off is one that I think kids very much struggle with. The nature, again, of just being able to be up here and talk, incredibly challenging, just to be seen, be visible. I was literally the kid that hid behind the wraparound couch in the house whenever people came to visit, because I wanted to be with people, but I did not want to be seen. Don't know what that's about. Should probably look into that at some point, but I'm sure it's connected. So I think just even owning, embracing, and then revealing is a challenge that I am positive the youth are going through, and whether it be around gender, sexuality, interests, whatever. I mean, there's so much judgment about such a variety of different things.
Maybe actually one brief thing I'd add is I think that it's like there's a thing about belonging. Like when you get the sense even a couple times that you don't belong, and that can even happen from walking into a room and not seeing anyone like you. Like it just is like, oh, okay, this isn't a space for people like me. And when, like for me, I'm like, when I've gotten that space a couple times, I start telling myself the story, I don't belong here. And then it's like a leap or a push to insist like, oh, I do belong here. Like I have I've come to the UU a number of times. I didn't keep coming back because I saw a lot of people who looked like me, but I felt welcome enough that I was like, I think I belong here. And other people echoed that. So I think that, like, I think about the kids who, or this young trans student who was like, I went to Seattle. It was amazing. I can't wait to move to Seattle. Like, I would love for trans kids growing up in Grants Pass to say, like, to feel like, I know that there's struggle and I've been told I don't belong, but I do belong here. And like, I could go away and come back, or I could stick around, and my presence here matters and is really important. Like, I would like to see that. And I hope, I hope we're moving towards that. Yeah.
Well put.
But I think that's where, and maybe you'll talk about this more, Dave, where schools that comes in, right? Is reflecting kids in the curriculum, and that can happen from age 3 or even younger. There are delightful storybooks, that are completely lovely and gender inclusive books that can be used all throughout the curriculums. And so, like you said, seeing yourself reflected, I belong here. And it's a hugely important message for kids everywhere, but especially in school.
All right. We are going to have some questions from the viewers. Here's one. What do you say to adults who are not supportive of gender neutral bathrooms in schools for students and for staff?
That is a great question. And we say a lot of things, but we're working really hard in K-12 to try to create more gender neutral spaces, individual spaces for anyone. So, I get the parent that is livid that there may be a trans student using a bathroom with their straight child. I mean, they're beyond angry. And so for us, we've identified spaces all throughout our schools where if you're not comfortable with that concept, then there is a bathroom for you. I think I'm creating gender neutral spaces for those students and families that don't understand. that these students belong and can use those spaces. So I'm creating safe spaces for everybody in that regard. And we're, you know, if we were able to build a new school today, it would have gender neutral restrooms throughout, just because, I mean, there's a lot of issues with restroom use for any student, for every student, and they're, you know, sometimes they're spaces where, you know, a lot of different behaviors take place that aren't appropriate. But yeah, we just make sure that if they're uncomfortable, that there's a place for them to go. And it's not easy and it's not inexpensive, but it is the right thing to do.
Maybe this would be a good place to put the pictures up that I sent. I'd be curious, who can tell who's a cis kid and who's a trans kid? Cis being, I don't know if we've talked about that, but somebody that identifies with the gender in which they were born. And this is a combination of some trans kids and some cisgender kids. So when I hear about the debate, and I hear about, well, the whole debate, regardless of the age, how are you going to uphold the genitalia thing, right? Or is there going to have somebody there and you've got to drop your pants, or, you know, how is that going to happen? And why does it need to happen? What, you know, when I look at these kids up here, why? What is that fear? The fear is an adult fear. The fear is an adult fear based on what adults do. It's much less what kids do. These kids aren't going to be hurting each other. None of them have that intention. They hurt each other if they've been hurt, generally. So anyways, a piece on the bathroom. Oh, and I do want to mention, I would say probably 100% of the students that I work with, for however long they're in school, they do not go to the bathroom. That is how distressful it is for them. And you could speak better to this, Deborah, than I can, but I cannot even imagine what that's doing to one's.
Increase urinary tract infections, kidney problems.
Yeah. So I think the trans kid is much more afraid to use the bathroom than a cisgender kid is to go into the bathroom with the trans kid in it.
All right, thank you. How do we communicate with school districts who do not support the use of affirming names, pronouns for students? How do we challenge the school districts?
Well, I guess I can tell you what, I mean, I get challenged on the opposite side of that all the time. And people are vocal and they, you know, they come to board meetings. And I think, you know, that it's important to be involved in that level, at that level with the school district, with the school board, working with administration. I mean, everybody, you know, the administrations that I work with across Southern Oregon are all, you know, they want to be as supportive as they can. They want to change the systems, but it's hard when the community consistently and constantly fights back on that. But it's that voice that we're hearing at these public meetings, and it's not other voices of support. So that question doesn't come to me in a public meeting. That question is often quiet and silent and after the fact, and everything that gets heard is the opposite of that question. And so I think school districts are open to having conversations that are productive, that are, you know, have a positive outcome and that support all students. But if you have a district that's not currently open to that concept, then you need to start having that conversation. And I know, like, for me, when I hear the person yelling at me for, you know, how dare you, you know, let students use these pronouns, they don't know any better, and they're hollering at me, that voice gets insignificant to me. I mean, I can't listen to that all the time. And so if you come with positive intent and a desire to change those things, then that's something that we can work with.
I would also add, like, from the, it's so neat to be in this conversation with you as an administrator, because I'm on the community organizer side, and I've attended more school board meetings over the past 6 months. Well, I had never attended a school board meeting before. So there's like a level there's like a learning curve to like, how do I participate? Where does my voice go? How do I show up? And I think that the angry transphobic parents have been doing a really good job of teaching each other how to participate. And so we who want to see schools be safe and affirming, for trans students, like, we teach each other how to show up. You can email the superintendent, you can go to the school board meeting, find out when the school board meetings are. Then you have to like see what's on the agenda and decide if you want to comment, but you don't have to do it alone. Like the I Affirm Coalition is a local coalition that's doing that. You can go to the Rogue Action Center's website and get in touch and join that way. Tomorrow, the Healthy Schools Project is putting on a training on like grassroots school board advocacy, because this is happening across the state where people are needing to learn how to participate so that they can advocate for their kids in schools. And if you miss the training tomorrow, there's other ways too, but figure out what that pathway is to get in the room where those decisions are happening. Or, even writing to a letter to the editor, like working in public space. Like, so much work has been done in civil rights, which secures the right to participate. But if we don't figure out how to participate, then, we're not necessarily using like the full power that we have in our rights as citizens.
So flipping from the school to the home, how do you affirm gender neutrality in an environment of a home that is that has extremely traditional gender roles and stereotyping?
I'm not 100% sure. I totally understand that question. And the person, this is the audience, so I apologize to whoever's asked that question. What I'm hearing is it like the extended family is?
Maybe they're like, you're a girl, so you have to bake, and you're a boy, so you have to play with trucks. And how do you be a bystander and stand up for the kid who doesn't fit?
I guess that's
I think, and if you're still watching, you can message us to clarify that it is a person who is trying to be an advocate. So an adult in the home that is trying to be an advocate for the transgender person, where all the other adults are not welcome.
Okay, well, I'd say a couple of things about that. One is, if that's the question, that there's one affirming adult and the rest of the house is very boxed in with the gender binary, is number one, reach out one-on-one to that person, to that kid, and let them know that, I love you, I see you, and this is a safe space. And I've had that situation many times with families where maybe one parent was accepting and another parent wasn't, or maybe the family was and grandparents weren't. And what I've always asked is to have the unaffirming family members come in and talk to me. Let's come in and have a conversation. This was, of course, pre-pandemic. Now we do it via Zoom. We have a Zoom conversation. But, if I can understand what the anxiety is, if I can understand what the fears are, we usually can make progress.
And I would just add to that, I 100% agree with everything. And, if it's an environment in which you can, it's not maybe abusive environment or whatever, correct them. When one of the family members gets the name or pronoun wrong, you be the one that jumps up and says, no, it's this. And usually it's not even no, it's this. It's just she or they or, whatever. It's just throw the word out there, throw the correct pronoun, the correct name out there. The more people do that, the more the family members are going to start getting that they can't keep ignoring this.
All right.
It's 4:30.
All right, so we couldn't get to all of your questions, but if you,
I feel like it, can we go a little over? Because there was one question that feels important to answer, given this group. And if we can't, well, there was a question about how do we know if our kids are just exploring, or is it a phase, or is it really, are they really trans? Having to deal with that as somebody that assesses, you know, it's a process to, especially depending on how young they are, that you're working with them to get clear. We don't write the letter right away. The one person I referenced, it took, I'd have to look, but maybe close to a year for me to get really confident that, you know, that it's real for them and that psychologically they could handle the stress that comes with it. So, and I've definitely had people that I won't write letters for because it feels very faddish. And it's just a way that they're presenting it, that maybe they've got a lot of friends, but I've not heard a lot about something deep and core to them as much as something that's more surfacey. And I don't know how else to put it, but I trust the therapists and the doctors that work with the trans population to be able to suss that out.
all right, thank you panelists for your participation in the Q&A segment. If you submitted a question and we didn't get to it, or you know, later in the day you come up with a question, or if you want additional resources, whether it's, you know, medical practitioners, social aspect, you can reach out to, you know, the Rogue Action Center's LGBTQ Listening Project. You can reach out to one of the churches represented today. And if any of the presenters are willing to give out their contact, we can do that at the end as well. And now I believe that Dave has a closing message that he would like to share.
Well, again, thank you for the time, and for those that are watching today, thank you for being interested in how you can support. I hope that's why everyone was watching today, is how we could support our transgender youth and gender nonconforming youth. You know, it was not hard for me to come today, but it wasn't without risk, for sure. There will be people that are angry that I, as a school official, came here to tell my story about being a father to a non-binary child. It astounds me that I probably check my phone. I probably have an email right now of someone that's angry about the fact that I'm sitting here talking about it. And so I think from a school perspective, schools are a safe place, but we have so far to go to make sure that it's a safe place every day, every minute when our students are walking through the door. And we talked a little bit about this, you know, our students live a majority of their life inside of our school buildings. And they've got to be a safe place for everybody that walks through the door. And like I said, we have a long way to go with how that works and what people understand and how they are accepting. But you know, professionals come to the school to work, to support these kids. And that's the only reason we're there, is to support and help these young people grow and they come with their biases, their beliefs, and sometimes that manifests into anger. And, you know, I think someone mentioned it earlier, you know, that everyone has their right to a belief, but they can't have that belief cause harm to a child. And, you know, a child has the right to be who they are. And so, I mean, I'm saying all the stuff that everyone's already said, but I'm saying it specifically in the context of K-12 and what we need to do as professionals. We've got to open the door, make it as safe for any student that walks in that door. And it has to be without compromise. It has to be every day. And it has to be all of us. There's no room for us to do harm to a child. And if I allow staff members to misuse pronouns, if I allow staff members to make fun of, and I mean, that happened to my child. They were made fun of by staff, and they knew that, and there's no place for that. That can't happen. And so it's a big, giant mountain to climb, and I'm happy to climb it. And I know I have some colleagues out there that feel, if not as stronger than I do about this, and we have some champions that are going to help us get there. But Monday when the bell rings, our schools have to be safe, and we continue to work on that. We continue to pass brave policy, I think, and